smell hits first. Not incense, not myrrh, not anything holy. It's the sour, sweet stench of a dead animal that's been lying too long in the heat. Fur stiff with dust, belly swollen, flies stitching, black thread from wound to wound. A boy stands over it with a carpenter's mallet in his hand, and his stomach turns so hard he thinks he'll vomit. But he doesn't. He breathes through his mouth. He kneels anyway. He lifts the ruined little body, careful, as if it could still feel pain, and lays it outside the workshop where the wind can take what the room cannot. Then he scrubs the floorboards until his knuckles split. Because this is what no one puts in the songs. Holiness often begins with cleaning up something rotten that you didn't kill, and didn't he? I want to see, but can't ignore. That boy's name is Joseph, and if you think you already know his story, quiet man, silent saint, background character, then stay with me, because the Joseph people, Miss is not gentle wallpaper. He is grit. He is discipline. He is the kind of man who gets tested in private, where nobody claps, and then gets tested again in public, where everybody stares. And somewhere, far from his dusty village, in the thunder-loud cities of Nigeria, millions would later call him our protector, because they recognized something in him, a strength that doesn't shout, but refuses to break. He doesn't grow up in palaces. He grows up in wood chips. Nazareth, small enough that your name travels faster than you do. A place where gossip is a kind of currency, and a man's worth is measured in 3 brutal questions. Can he work? Can he provide? Can he keep his household from shame? In the mornings, Joseph wakes to the rasp of a handsaw and the cough of a charcoal brazier. The workshop is not romantic. It's practical. The air tastes like resin and ash. Splinters hide like tiny knives in the grain of every plank. A careless grip can slice a thumb open and ruin the day's labor. A careless word can ruin a family for years. His father, an older craftsman, shoulders like a beam, teaches him the first law of survival. Measure twice, cut once. It's not just about wood, it's about life. Don't rush. Don't assume. Don't let your temper do your thinking. Joseph learns to read wood the way some men read faces. He can tell when a board is crooked before it betrays him. He can feel weak points under his fingertips like a doctor finding a fracture. That sensitivity, this almost painful attention, becomes his gift and his curse, because it makes him reliable, and it makes him notice everything. He notices hunger, not the dramatic kind where a town collapses into screaming, the quiet kind, the kind where a mother waters down the stew and nobody mentions it. The kind where a neighbor's child grows thin, and the adults tell jokes louder so no one has to talk about it. Joseph notices unfairness, too. Not the big kind that makes laws, but the everyday kind that makes people bitter. A customer who promises payment after the harvest and vanishes. A merchant who haggles like he's fighting a war, pushing the price down until the craftsman's labor is worth less than the dust it creates. And then, there is the competitor. His name, let's call him Natan, is a builder from nearby, the kind of man who smiles with his teeth and keeps his eyes cold. Natan doesn't just build things. He builds an image. He tells stories about himself louder than the hammer blows. He talks about connections, about bigger projects, about how he's going to work in places where the stone shines and the money never runs out. He looks at Joseph's quiet work and calls it slow. He watches Joseph refuse to cheat measurements, refuse to swap good wood for bad, refuse to inflate the bill, and Natan laughs. Because for him, morality is what you perform when it's profitable. Joseph hates him. And he doesn't. That's the worst kind of conflict, isn't it? The one where you can't fully despise the enemy because you understand what makes him dangerous. Joseph understands that Natan isn't strong because he is better. He's strong because he's willing to do things Joseph won't. Cut corners, pay bribes, spread rumors when he can't win with skill, promise the impossible and blame others when it collapses. And it would be easy, so easy, for Joseph to become the same. Sometimes he imagines it. He imagines slipping a knotty board into a customer's order and saving the best wood for someone who pays more. He imagines charging extra just once because they can afford it. He imagines laughing at the fools who believe a man's word should mean something. And then he imagines the look on his father's face if he ever did. Not anger, not shouting, disappointment. The kind that makes your chest ache like you swallowed a stone. So Joseph chooses the harder path, the one that doesn't look heroic from the outside. He becomes consistent. He becomes the man whose work doesn't collapse. The man whose doorframes don't warp in the rains. The man whose yokes sit on an ox's shoulders without turning the skin raw. That's not glory. That's integrity. And integrity is expensive. As Joseph grows, he begins to take jobs farther out. There are whispers of construction in a growing city, Sepphoris, where Roman influence presses into the land like a boot print. Bigger buildings, bigger demands, bigger temptations. Men travel there and come back with coins and stories that stink of compromise. Joseph goes not because he loves Rome, but because he loves responsibility. When he returns at dusk, sweat dried into salt on his skin, he stops by the synagogue. He stands among men who pretend they aren't tired. He listens to ancient words that scrape at the soul. Do justice, love mercy, walk humbly. Humbly. Not weakly, not silently, because you're afraid to speak. Humbly, because you know something larger than you watches you, even when nobody else does. And here, in this pattern of work and prayer, Joseph's inner life forms like a knot tightening in wood. He becomes a man of restraint, a man who does not give his emotions the reins, a man who can absorb insult and still act with honor. But the world tests that kind of man, not once, repeatedly. One day, a customer arrives furious, shouting in the street, making sure everyone hears. He claims Joseph's work is faulty. A beam cracked. A latch fails. In a small town, accusations spread like smoke. Joseph's throat tightens. His pride flares hot. He wants to yell back. He wants to drag the man to the house and prove him wrong. Then he sees Natan standing just behind the customer, half hidden, enjoying the show. And Joseph understands instantly. This isn't about a beam. It's about reputation. Natan has been whispering, planting doubt, fattening the town's appetite for scandal, because scandal makes people forget to look closely at the quality of your work. Joseph takes a breath so slow it feels like swallowing fire. He walks with the customer to the site. He examines the beam. He sees the truth. The beam has been tampered with, a wedge removed, a stress point forced, a crack coaxed into existence. He could expose the sabotage. He could accuse. He could start a feud that turns neighbors into witnesses and friends into sides. But Joseph knows something else, too. In a village like this, even if you prove your innocence, the stain lingers. People love a story more than they love the truth. So he does something that looks like weakness and is actually control. He replaces the beam without charging extra. He fixes the latch. He says, calm as a level tool on a straight line, it will hold. And he leaves Natan with nothing to feed on. No rage, no spectacle, no blood in the water. That night, Joseph scrubs his hands until they're raw, not because they're dirty, but because he feels dirty, like he swallowed someone else's lie, and now has to cleanse it. This is how Joseph's youth passes, not in adventures with swords, but in battles over the soul, battles no one writes down, battles that shape a man into a shield. And in the shadows of those ordinary days, something else grows. Joseph's sense of calling, not the dramatic kind that arrives with thunder, the quiet kind that arrives like a repeated knock you can't ignore. You are not here only to earn bread. You are here to protect what is fragile. Because Joseph sees what fragile looks like. He sees young girls married off too early because their families are desperate. He sees boys hardened into cruelty because softness gets punished. He sees men who drink to forget that they have failed their households and women who carry burdens that should never have been theirs. He begins to understand. The world is full of things that can't defend themselves. And that's when the idea of fatherhood, real fatherhood, not just biology, starts to take root in him. Fatherhood as a stance, a decision, a willingness to take a hit so someone else doesn't have to. Yet, he also fears it. Because fatherhood means vulnerability. It means loving something enough that losing it would break you. There is a moment, small, almost nothing, when Joseph watches a sparrow hop along the workshop threshold. The bird pecks at crumbs, bold, foolish, alive. Then a cat's paw flashes from under a shelf and grabs it. The sound the sparrow makes is quick and horrible, like a squeal swallowed. Joseph lunges without thinking. He yanks the cat back. The bird flutters, stunned, one wing bent wrong. Joseph's chest heaves. The cat hisses and escapes. Joseph stands there holding a trembling creature that may not survive. He feels a strange heat behind his eyes. Not tears exactly. Rage, sorrow, a helplessness that tastes metallic. He sets the sparrow down gently in a patch of shade outside. He watches it struggle, and he hates the world for being like this, beautiful and brutal in the same breath. And that's when he hears, in the quiet place inside him, the question that will define him. When the vulnerable are grabbed, will you look away, or will you intervene? Not everyone answers yes. Joseph does. He doesn't know yet what it will cost. As he reaches adulthood, people begin to look at him differently. The old women evaluate his posture. The men measure his steadiness. Mothers consider whether he would be a safe roof for their daughters. Joseph keeps working, keeps praying, keeps refusing to become Natan. Natan, meanwhile, grows bolder. He takes jobs Joseph would never touch. He flatters the right people. He learns the art of appearing generous while secretly profiting. He becomes, in a way, the face of success that shallow minds admire. And then, like a blade sliding into a sheath, the rivalry becomes personal. It happens at a community gathering. Nothing official, just people crowded together, talking too loud, laughing too hard, pretending. They aren't all listening for news. Someone mentions a young woman. Mary, not in a crude way, in a careful way. Like her name is a cup you don't want to spill. Joseph hears it and feels something. He's seen her before, of course. Nazareth is small. He knows the tilt of her head when she listens, the calm in her eyes that doesn't come from naivety, but from depth. She moves through the world like someone who carries a secret and isn't crushed by it. Joseph has always assumed he would marry. That life would unfold the way life unfolds for most. Work, home, children, aging hands, a grave. But when he hears Mary's name, it's as if the air tightens around him, not desire. Something more unsettling, a sense that his life is being aimed. And that's when Natan appears beside him, as if he's been waiting. "You're quiet," Natan says, smiling. "Thinking about her?" Joseph doesn't answer. Natan leans in, voice low enough to sound friendly. "Careful. A man like you, you're easy to trap. You think goodness protects you?" Joseph finally looks at him. "What do you want?" Natan shrugs. "Nothing. Just, there are people who rise and people who stay small. You could rise if you stopped pretending the world rewards clean hands." Joseph's jaw tightens. He wants to hit him, not because of the insult, but because of the poison behind it. The suggestion that purity is stupidity, that integrity is weakness, that any man who refuses corruption is just afraid. Joseph says very softly, "My hands build. They don't take." Natan's smile twitches. "We'll see." And in that moment, Joseph feels the future shift, like distant thunder rolling closer, like a storm deciding where it will land. He doesn't know yet that his greatest battle won't be over wood or wages. It will be over trust, over a woman's name spoken carefully, over a child that will not make sense, over a threat that comes not only from enemies with power, but from neighbors with tongues. For now, Joseph goes home and kneels where no one can watch him. He presses his forehead to the floor. He lets his breath slow. He asks for wisdom, for steadiness, for courage that doesn't need applause. Outside, Nazareth sleeps, and somewhere in the dark, Natan plots the next whisper. But the quiet man in the workshop has already made his choice. long before the world knows his story. When the fragile is threatened, he will not look away. Joseph thought he understood what fear felt like. He'd felt it when a beam slipped and almost crushed a man's foot. He'd felt it when a fever went through the village, and children's cries turned thin and strange in the night. He'd felt it when Natan's rumors began to circle his name like flies. But those fears were mechanical, external. You could brace yourself, act quickly, fix something. This was different. This was the kind of fear that crawls inside your ribs and sits there, heavy, intimate, like a thing that has paid rent and refuses to leave. It began with a simple visit. Mary's family wasn't wealthy. Their doorway wasn't guarded. Their walls didn't shine with plaster like the houses of people who were close to Roman favor. But when Joseph stepped into their courtyard, everything in him went quiet. Even the dust seemed to settle. Her father greeted him with the formal warmth of a man doing his duty. Her mother's eyes did that quick measuring. How steady are you? How safe are you? Will my daughter suffer with you? Mary came out with a water jar balanced at her hip. She didn't blush like a girl playing a part. She didn't look down like someone pretending to be modest. She looked at Joseph plainly, like she was listening to something behind his words. Joseph had built tables for loud men who wanted to be admired. He'd fixed doors for men who shouted at their wives and then tried to buy forgiveness with gifts. He'd seen vanity, cruelty, hunger for control. Mary felt unowned, not wild, not rebellious, just not possessed by other people's expectations. Joseph heard himself speak. He offered the usual, his work, his plans, his intention to provide. It sounded thin, even to him, like a list of tools laid out on a cloth. Mary's voice was soft when she answered, but it didn't wobble. She didn't flirt. She didn't perform sweetness. She simply said she would pray. Pray. Not, I'll think about it. Not, my father will decide. Not, what can you offer? Pray. Something about that hit Joseph like a splinter under the nail. Small, sharp, impossible to ignore. In the weeks that followed, the betrothal moved forward the way such things did. Families consulted, obligations named, agreements made. A promise. Public enough to matter. Private enough to be dangerous. Joseph began to shape his life around a future that now had a face. He worked longer. He took on extra repairs. He turned down risky deals. He planned a small addition to his home. Nothing grand, just a room that could hold warmth, laughter, children. He imagined Mary's hands setting bread on a table he had built. He imagined her voice reading prayers over a sleeping infant. And he fought the old fear, loving something enough that the world could take it away. Natan noticed. Of course he noticed. Natan drifted closer like smoke seeking a crack. At the market, he'd clap Joseph on the shoulder too hard, grin too wide. So, Natan would say, you're choosing a saint. Joseph learned to answer with silence. Silence frustrated Natan because it offered no handle to grab, no emotion to twist, no confession to weaponize. But Natan wasn't only teasing. He was watching, waiting. Because a betrothal is a bridge, and bridges are easiest to destroy in the middle. Then Mary disappeared. Not forever. Not dramatically. But for a stretch long enough that people began to fill the blank with their own stories. A relative in another town, someone said. A visit. A family matter. Joseph didn't pry. He trusted. And that trust was his first offering. When Mary returned, the air changed. It wasn't something you could point at like a cracked plank. It was the way conversations paused half a heartbeat when she walked by. The way women's eyes flicked to her belly and then away. The way some men stared too long, like they were trying to solve a puzzle they didn't want to respect. Joseph didn't understand at first. He only felt the village tighten around them, like a rope pulling in. Then he saw. Mary's body, so ordinary, so human, had begun to show a truth that didn't care about opinions. She was pregnant. The world didn't explode. It did something worse. It smiled. It murmured. It pretended to be shocked while secretly delighted, because scandal is entertainment for people who are afraid to examine their own sins. Joseph's heart didn't break like glass. It cracked like wood under pressure, quietly, with a deep internal sound that only he could hear. He went to her house with legs that felt carved from stone. He expected to rage, to accuse, to demand names, to demand explanations. Mary met him at the doorway like she had been waiting for the blow. And then she spoke. Not fast, not defensive, not pleading. She told him something impossible, a messenger, a promise, a holy vmeshatalstvo, an intervention from God that placed a child within her without betrayal, without shameful secret meetings, without another man's hands. Joseph felt his face go numb, because there are lies that feel like lies, slippery, frantic, dressed up with extra details. And then there are statements so calm, so unadorned, that they don't feel like tricks. Mary didn't sound like someone trying to escape consequences. She sounded like someone carrying a weight that could crush her and refusing to drop it on someone else. Joseph wanted to believe her, and he also wanted to scream, because believing her meant stepping into a fire that would not stop burning. It meant taking the village's spit, their laughter, their suspicion, and letting it coat his name, too. It meant becoming a man people pointed at as a fool, or worse, as a collaborator in something dirty. And if she was lying, if she had betrayed him, then believing her would make him the softest target in Nazareth. Joseph left, not because he stopped caring, because he cared too much to speak while his soul was bleeding. He walked until the town thinned and the fields took over, until the air smelled like crushed grass and dung and distant smoke. His mind played the same vicious loop. If Mary is innocent, then God has asked you to protect the unprotectable. If Mary is guilty, then God has asked you to swallow humiliation or become cruel. Either way, Joseph loses something. Either way, Joseph is punished. That night, in the workshop, he lit a small lamp and stared at his own hands. Hands stained by honest work, hands that had never stolen, never struck a woman, never taken advantage, and he felt, for the first time, temptation that wasn't about money. The temptation to harden, to say, fine, if the world is ugly, I'll become uglier. If people will accuse me anyway, I'll give them a reason. He imagined dragging Mary into public judgment, forcing her to explain herself until her voice broke, until tears made her look guilty, until the crowd's hunger for punishment was fed. And something inside him recoiled, not because he was weak, because he recognized the shape of evil. It always offers you relief in exchange for your humanity. Joseph put his forehead in his palms and breathed like a man drowning, trying to remember where the surface was. Then the door creaked. He looked up. Natan, standing there as if he owned the shadows. He didn't ask permission. He just walked in, slow, smelling of cheap wine and satisfaction. Joseph, Natan said, too gently, like he was petting a wound. I heard. Joseph didn't speak. Natan glanced around the workshop, eyes lingering on the tools, the clean lines, the order Joseph kept as if order could keep chaos out. That's the problem with men like you, Natan continued. You build your life like a straight wall. You think it will hold. Then someone leans on it, and it cracks. Joseph's jaw tightened. Natan stepped closer. You can still save your name. Joseph finally found his voice, rough. How? Natan smiled. Do what everyone expects. Break it off. Make it public. Let the blame stick to her. People will pity you. They'll say you were fooled. You'll be the victim. Joseph stared at him, trying to understand how a human being could sound so eager. Natan lowered his voice. And if you want more than pity, I can help you. There are whispers you could direct, names you could suggest. People love a villain. Give them one, and they'll stop looking at you. Joseph felt nausea rise. Not metaphorical. Real. In his throat. You came here for that? Joseph asked. To offer me a way to make her bleed so I can walk clean? Natan's smile faltered, just a flicker. Don't be dramatic. This is survival. Joseph took a step toward him. The lamp threw shadows across their faces like war paint. My hands build, Joseph said, voice low, dangerous. They don't destroy. Natan's eyes hardened. Then you'll be destroyed. He turned to leave, then paused at the door like he couldn't resist twisting the knife once more. You think God rewards men like you, he said. Watch what happens when you choose shame. And he was gone. Joseph sat down hard, as if his bones had suddenly become too heavy. Outside, the village slept. Inside, Joseph's mind screamed. He didn't sleep. He watched the lamp burn down to a stub. He listened to his own breathing. He replayed Mary's calm eyes. He remembered the way she had said she would pray before agreeing to the betrothal. Who prays before accepting a safe, respectable man unless she is trying to obey something deeper than comfort? At some point, exhaustion dragged him into darkness. And in that darkness, Joseph dreamed. Not a normal dream, the kind made of old memories and nonsense images. This one had the sharpness of waking life, the clean edge of a blade. A presence stood before him. No face he could describe, no body he could explain. Just a force that made the air feel thicker, like the world itself was holding its breath. Joseph felt exposed, not physically, spiritually. As if every compromise he had never made, every thought he had never spoken, every fear he tried to hide, was suddenly open. And the presence communicated, not with complicated words, but with certainty. Do not be afraid to take Mary as your wife. The child is from God. You will name him. You will guard him. Joseph tried to speak, but the dream pressed him into stillness. Then, like a twist of a knife, another truth was placed in him. This will not be private. This will not be admired. This will be dangerous. And then, silence. Joseph woke with sweat cold on his skin. The lamp was out. Dawn was just a pale bruising at the edge of the window. For a moment, his heart pounded like he had been running. Then he felt it. A strange clarity. Not joy. Resolve. He understood that the biggest decision of his life wouldn't feel triumphant. It would feel like stepping under a weight that wasn't his. And holding it anyway. He got up. He washed his face. He put his hands on the workbench as if to borrow strength from the wood. And then he went to Mary. The streets were quiet, but even quiet streets listen. A dog barked. A rooster screamed into the morning like an accusation. When Mary opened the door, her eyes searched his face as if she was reading the verdict before he spoke. Joseph's voice came out steady. I'm here. Mary's lips parted, but no words came. Joseph swallowed. I don't understand everything, but I'm not leaving you alone in this. A subtle tremor ran through her. Relief, grief, gratitude, all tangled. Joseph held up a hand, not to stop her, but to set the boundary of what he could carry right then. We will do what is right, he said, even if it burns. That was the moment Joseph crossed a line he could never uncross. And the village noticed immediately. People noticed the way he kept walking beside her, the way he didn't flinch from her shadow, the way he didn't step back when women whispered. A child pointed. A man snorted. Someone laughed too loudly. Natan's eyes, when Joseph caught them across the market, were bright with disbelief. Then anger. Because Joseph had robbed him of the victory he was already celebrating. Natan started working harder, not with wood, but with words. He told people Joseph was covering his shame. He told them Joseph was either a fool or complicit. He implied Mary had trapped him, and Joseph was too proud to admit it. He hinted that he, Natan, had always known something was off about Mary. The ugliness of it was almost artistic. How carefully he shaped his poison so everyone could drink it and pretend they weren't thirsty for it. Joseph became a spectacle. Imagine walking through your own town and feeling eyes on you like insects crawling over your skin. Imagine hearing your name spoken with pity, with mockery, with suspicion. Sometimes all at once. Joseph didn't fight back with rumors. He fought back with endurance. He kept working. He kept providing. He kept his steps measured, his shoulders square. But there were nights his body shook with contained anger. Nights he stared at the ceiling and thought, I chose this. I chose this. And then, another pressure. An order. A journey. A requirement that forced people to move, to register, to obey. The world of empires doesn't care about the fragile. It just moves them like pieces on a board. Joseph had to take Mary with him, not when she was comfortable, not when it was safe, when she was heavy with child, when every jolt of a road could become a disaster, when the cold bites deeper and the body aches in ways that feel like betrayal. And as they prepared, Natan stepped into Joseph's path one last time, like a man who couldn't accept that his enemy wouldn't collapse. "You're really doing it," Natan said, voice thick with contempt. "Dragging her around like this? You think that makes you noble?" Joseph didn't stop walking. Natan followed a step, like a shadow refusing to detach. "You know what people will say when something goes wrong," he hissed. "They'll say it's punishment. They'll say you deserved it." Joseph stopped then. Slowly, deliberately, he turned. His eyes were tired. Not weak, tired in the way. A mountain is tired of weather. "You want me to be afraid," Joseph said. Natan sneered. "You should be—" Joseph leaned in just slightly. "I am afraid," he said. "Every day." That admission surprised Natan, because bullies expect denial or rage or trembling. Joseph continued, voice low. "But I'd rather fear and do what's right than feel nothing and become you." Natan's face tightened, as if struck. Joseph stepped back, and his last words were not a threat. They were a sentence. "Stay away from my family." Family. Joseph said it out loud, claimed it, sealed it. And with that, he led Mary out of Nazareth, out of the small-town courtroom of whispers, into the open road where danger doesn't gossip. It just arrives. They traveled with aching feet and dry mouths. They passed strangers who didn't know their story and didn't care. They slept in places that smelled of sweat and animals. They ate what they could. They endured. And then, when the time came, when Mary's breathing changed, when her face went pale and then fierce with pain, there was no neat bed, waiting, no room reserved, no soft landing for the promised child. There was only a cramped space, rough surfaces, the animal heat of bodies nearby, the metallic scent of blood, and the awful, sacred truth that life arrives whether the world is ready or not. Joseph's hands, the builder's hands, became the hands of a guardian. He couldn't take the pain from Mary. He couldn't stop the world from being harsh. He couldn't silence the future. But he could do what he had always done. Notice what is fragile, and refuse to look away. When the child finally cried, sharp, raw, alive, Joseph felt his own throat close. This was the twist no one in Nazareth could understand. The scandal they laughed at had become a heartbeat, a human being, small enough to fit in Joseph's forearm, heavy enough to change history. Joseph looked down at the newborn and felt the strangest terror of all. Not fear of the town, fear of failing the assignment God had just placed in his arms. And somewhere far behind them, in a village that still murmured and judged, Natan's rumors had not died. They had only begun to travel. The first time Joseph realized he was being hunted, it wasn't from a soldier's shout. It was from a mother's scream. A woman burst into the doorway of the place where travelers had been sleeping, hair unbound, face shining with terror, clutching her, toddler so tightly the child's cheeks turned red. She wasn't calling for help because she'd been robbed. She was calling because she'd heard something worse than robbery. Men in power were asking questions about babies. Not, "Where are the thieves?" Not, "Who owes taxes?" But, "Where is the child?" And when power starts asking about children, the air itself becomes a weapon. Joseph held his own infant, still soft, still new, and felt his stomach drop like a stone into a well, because suddenly, everything clicked into a terrifying shape. This wasn't only a scandal from Nazareth. This wasn't only a strange birth in a hard place. This was a spark in dry grass, the kind of spark that makes kings paranoid. Mary's eyes met Joseph's. There was no need for dramatic speeches. Both of them understood. If danger came, it wouldn't come politely. It would come like a blade. Joseph did what he always did when something fragile was threatened. He moved. Not later. Not after discussion. Now. He wrapped the child. He tightened the straps. He gathered what little they had with hands that didn't tremble, because trembling wastes time. Mary followed his rhythm without question. Outside, people were still murmuring, still half asleep, still pretending the world was stable. Joseph stepped into the cold night, as if stepping into a river. No parade, no heroic music, just breath steaming in darkness, and the quiet certainty that the next hours could decide whether their child lived. They traveled like shadows, not fast enough to look suspicious, not slow enough to be caught. Joseph avoided well-lit roads. He kept to broken ground where sandals scuffed softly and rocks cut at the soles. The child slept in bursts, then woke and cried, and each cry felt like a flare fired into the sky. Joseph learned a new kind of prayer, not the prayer of calm synagogue voices and measured recitation, the prayer of a man whispering into his own throat so the night wouldn't hear. Please, please, please. They reached a place where they could hide among strangers, faces they didn't know, languages that tasted different, eyes that didn't care who they were as long as they paid for bread. Egypt. Just saying the name felt like stepping into an old story, a land of refuge and oppression, of memory and irony. Joseph, who had built lives out of wood, now built a life out of improvisation. He found work wherever a hand was needed. In Egypt, a carpenter wasn't a quaint village role, it was survival skill. Joseph repaired doors swollen by damp. He patched furniture for merchants who wanted cheap solutions. He fixed wagons whose wheels screamed like injured animals. He built with unfamiliar materials, learned new tricks, negotiated with men who smiled and still tried to cheat him. And here, in this exile, Joseph's service to God became brutally practical. He didn't stand on platforms and preach. He provided. He protected. He kept Mary from being cornered in narrow alleys by men whose hunger wasn't for food. He kept their child close. He kept their small family intact while the world outside pulsed with danger. If you want to understand Joseph's sanctity, don't picture him glowing in stained glass. Picture him at the edge of a foreign street, watching two men argue, reading the threat in their shoulders and the angle of their hands the way he once read a warped beam, then quietly turning his family the other direction before violence spills over. That's worship too, refusing to let chaos claim what you've been entrusted with. Years passed like that, not comfortable, not stable, but alive. And then, one day, rumors changed tone. Not about babies, about a king. The king, Herod, was dead. The air didn't become safe. But it became different. A door cracked open. Joseph hesitated anyway. He had learned that empires don't stop being dangerous just because one tyrant dies. Power is a beast. You can cut off one head and another grows teeth. But the pull of home is primal. Nazareth, for all its whispers, was still the soil that shaped him. And there was something else. A sense. Quiet, persistent. That their child's story did not belong in exile forever. So Joseph brought them back. Returning home did not feel like victory. It felt like walking into a room where everyone has been talking about you. Nazareth's hills looked the same. The wind smelled familiar. The stones remembered his footsteps. But the eyes, those were different. People stared at the child, not because he was special in a visible way, because he was a symbol. Some saw a miracle they didn't dare name. Some saw a mystery they resented. Some saw an old scandal that refused to die. Joseph kept his head down and rebuilt his life like a man laying a foundation under a house that might be attacked. And then, like a curse that had crossed borders, Natan appeared again. Joseph saw him one afternoon near the market, older now, heavier at the jaw, dressed a little better than before. The success he'd chased had come. At least on the surface. He had new tools, new connections, a confidence sharpened by years of winning small, ugly victories. Natan's smile, when their eyes met, was almost affectionate. Back, he said, like they were old friends. Joseph didn't slow. Move. Natan stepped aside, but his voice followed like spit. I heard you ran away. People said you had to... Joseph's hands tightened around the bundle he carried. He didn't turn. You heard lies. As usual. Natan chuckled. Lies are just stories people choose to believe. Joseph stopped. Slowly, he turned. The street noise seemed to fade behind the pressure in his chest. And what story are you choosing now? Joseph asked. Natan's eyes flicked, quick, greedy, to the child walking near Mary. This boy with calm eyes who watched everything like he was older than his years. Natan's voice dropped. That the world doesn't forget. That you can hide for a while, Joseph, but you can't hide forever. Joseph stepped closer. You are not my problem. Natan's smile thinned. No, he said softly. But the people who listen to me, they might be... Then he walked away, leaving Joseph with a cold truth. The rivalry had evolved. This wasn't just one man trying to ruin another man's reputation. This was someone trying to control a narrative. Because controlling narratives is how you control people. Joseph went home that night and did something that looked like nothing. He taught his son a prayer, not because the boy didn't know it. Because Joseph needed the rhythm of it, like he needed breath. He taught him the Shema, words that declare God's oneness, God's claim, God's nearness. He spoke slowly, letting the syllables settle into the boy's bones. Hear, O Israel! He watched the child repeat it, voice clear, face serious, as if he understood more than a child should. And Joseph felt something twist inside him. Pride? Fear? Both. Because now Joseph's daily life became a strange balance between normal and impossible. Normal. Work, meals, repairs, small laughter, scraped knees, Mary's quiet presence like a lamp that doesn't flicker. Impossible. The sense that this child carried something that would eventually draw fire. So Joseph's preaching was done in the only language he knew. Action. He preached by refusing bribes when money was tight. He preached by treating customers fairly, even when they looked down on him. He preached by not letting anger dictate his decisions. He preached by shaping his son's world into something steady enough for holiness to grow. And in Nazareth, steadiness is not passive. It's resistance. Because every time Joseph refused to play the village's games, he embarrassed the people who did. Every time he treated Mary with respect, he shamed the men who treated their wives like property. Every time he let his son ask questions without slapping him into silence, he made the old harsh patterns look ugly. Some men disliked Joseph for that. Others admired him quietly. Many simply watched. And Natan, always watching, began to spread a different kind of poison now. He started telling people the boy was strange, too clever, too intense. He implied the boy might grow up to challenge the order of things. He framed it like concern. Have you heard how he speaks? Natan would say, eyebrows raised. Not like a child. It's unsettling. And people who fear what they can't control, leaned in. But Joseph kept building a counterstory with his hands. He brought the boy into the workshop. He showed him how to hold a tool without injury, how to measure, how to steady a plank with your knee, how to read grain lines like pathways, how to breathe when frustration rises. A child's fingers, small and quick, learned to sand, to sweep, to carry. And here is a detail that's easy to miss if you only think of Joseph as the quiet one. Joseph had to teach his son how to be human in a world that would eventually demand he be more. That's a terrifying responsibility, because how do you raise a boy who will someday be a sign without turning him into a spectacle? Joseph chose the same method he always chose. Make the extraordinary live inside the ordinary. Let holiness be practiced in small decisions, in patience, in compassion, in restraint, in work that serves others. When the boy, Jesus, was old enough, Joseph took him to synagogue regularly, not for show, not to look pious, because identity is formed by repetition. He let the boy hear the scriptures the way you let a seed hear rain. and the boy listened with a stillness that sometimes made the room uncomfortable. Adults notice when a child listens too closely. It's like being watched by innocence. Then came the pilgrimage to Jerusalem. It's hard to explain the intensity of Jerusalem if you've never been there. Streets crowded with bodies, voices, animals, commerce, prayer all tangled. The smell is a shock. Sweat, blood from sacrifices, smoke, spices, sewage, fresh bread, crushed herbs. It's sacred and disgusting at the same time, and that contrast can make your head spin. Joseph walked with Mary and the boy through crowds that moved like tides. He kept his hand near the child's shoulder, not gripping, just ready. Always ready. In the temple courts, Joseph watched his son's eyes widen, not with childish wonder, but with recognition, as if the boy had been here before. That was the first time Joseph felt the edge of the future cut him. Because the boy didn't just observe, he engaged. He asked questions that made older men blink. He spoke with a clarity that didn't sound rehearsed. He listened, and then answered in ways that rearranged the air in the room, like someone opening a window in a place that had grown stale. Joseph stood at the edge and felt pride rise, then fear smother it. Because attention is a magnet, and magnets attract metal. Knives are metal too. When the time came to return, they realized the boy was missing. The panic that hit Joseph wasn't cinematic. It was animal. He tore through crowds, eyes scanning faces, heart hammering. He pushed past merchants, apologized to nobody, because politeness is a luxury when your child is gone. Mary's face was tight with controlled terror. They searched in the places a boy might drift to. Food stalls, courtyards, among other traveling families. Nothing. Night came. The city grew colder. Shadows grew longer. Joseph's mind did something cruel. It replayed every story he had ever heard of children stolen, children harmed, children lost in the chaos of festivals. His throat tasted like bile. His hands shook for the first time in years. And then, on the third day, after a stretch of fear that felt like a lifetime, they found him, not hiding, not crying, sitting among teachers again, calm, speaking as if this was the most natural place in the world. Joseph's relief surged so violently it almost became anger. He wanted to grab the boy, to shake him, to shout. But when Jesus looked up, his expression wasn't defiant. It was puzzled, as if Joseph and Mary were the ones who didn't understand. Joseph heard Mary's voice, strained with love and fear, asking why he had done this to them. And the boy answered in a way that cut through Joseph like a chisel. He spoke of his father's house. Joseph felt something inside him go very still, because Joseph knew in his bones that this was not rejection. It was revelation. And revelations don't feel gentle. They feel like your old life snapping and your new life being forced into place. On the road home, Joseph said little, not because he didn't have thoughts, because he had too many. He watched his son walk ahead sometimes, the boy's silhouette against the hills, and he felt grief for a future he could not control. That is Joseph's tragedy and Joseph's glory. He was asked to raise someone he could never fully keep. After Jerusalem, the years moved with a strange acceleration. Joseph's body began to change the way bodies do when they've carried too much too long. His back ached more. His hands stiffened in the mornings. His breath came harder after long days. He noticed it and said nothing. Men like Joseph don't announce pain. They adapt. But Natan noticed too. One day, Natan caught him alone by the workshop, eyes sharp. "You're slowing down," Natan said. Joseph didn't look up from his work. "I'm working." Natan stepped closer, voice oily. "And your boy? He's growing." "People talk." Joseph's tool paused. "People always talk." Natan's smile curled. "Not like this. Some say he's destined, others say he's dangerous. If you were wise, you'd keep him small." Joseph finally met his eyes. "You don't keep a fire small by putting your hand over it." Natan's gaze flicked, a flash of irritation. "And what if that fire burns your house?" Joseph's voice was quiet. Then I'll stand in the doorway until it burns me too. For a moment, something like hatred, pure, stunned, crossed Natan's face. Martyr fantasies, Natan muttered. Joseph didn't answer. He returned to his work, but inside, he felt the weight of those words. Until it burns me too. Because Joseph could sense the time approaching when his son's life would move beyond the workshop, beyond Nazareth, beyond Joseph's reach. So Joseph poured everything he could into what remained. He taught Jesus how to honor labor without worshiping money. He taught him how to speak truth without craving applause. He taught him how to look at people, especially the poor, the shamed, the outcast, and see a human being, not a problem. And he taught him something even harder: how to endure misunderstanding without becoming bitter. Joseph's greatest sermons were never delivered with a raised voice. They were delivered by the way he treated Mary, steadfast, protective, never using her as a shield for his own ego. They were delivered by the way he refused to win with cruelty, even when cruelty would have been easier. They were delivered by the way he kept choosing responsibility over reputation. And yet, as Joseph's strength faded, the danger didn't. Because rumors are a kind of currency, and Natan was wealthy with them now. He began implying to others that Joseph's household was unstable, that the boy's intensity was a threat, that someone should keep an eye on them. He didn't need to accuse openly. He just needed to plant suspicion and let fear do the work. Joseph responded with the only weapon he trusted: a life that contradicted the rumors. He showed up. He paid debts. He fixed neighbors' tools when they broke. He helped repair roofs after storms. He did good quietly, not to win people, but to starve the lies. Still, lies don't need truth to survive. They only need attention. And Joseph knew that eventually, attention would shift away from him and lock onto Jesus like a hunting dog catching scent. That knowledge sat behind Joseph's eyes every time he watched his son laugh, every time he saw him pause to help someone, every time. The boy looked out across the hills as if listening for a voice no one else could hear. Then came the strangest twist of all. Joseph began to feel peace, not because things were safe. They weren't. But because Joseph realized his role was never to control the whole story. His role was to carry the fragile portion assigned to him until it could stand on its own. And that is exactly what he had done. A few people started coming to Joseph privately, not to talk about scandal, to ask for guidance. A younger man whose temper kept ruining his life. A father who didn't know how to feed his children without turning cruel. A widow who needed someone to repair a door so she could sleep without fear. Joseph didn't lecture them. He listened. He offered practical help. He offered quiet words that didn't glitter, but held weight. In those moments, Joseph's ministry was visible. He was building something bigger than furniture. He was building trust. And trust is what communities survive on when everything else collapses. But communities can also turn on trust. One evening, Joseph returned to his workshop and found something on his workbench, a small object wrapped in cloth. He unwrapped it and felt his blood go cold. It was a child's sandal, old, worn, one he recognized from the road years ago in exile, a memory he'd tried to bury, and tucked inside the cloth was a note. No signature, just a message. We remember. Joseph's breath caught. This wasn't a random threat. It was precise. Someone had reached into his past and pulled out the sharpest piece. His eyes narrowed, mind racing. Who could know? Who could have followed? And then, like a shadow stepping into light, he saw Natan across the street, watching, not hiding his satisfaction this time. Joseph didn't chase him. He didn't shout. He simply closed his hand around the sandal until the leather creaked. Because Joseph understood something terrifying. Natan wasn't just jealous anymore. Natan had become the kind of man who would feed a family's story to dangerous people if it meant gaining leverage. And Joseph's rivalry with him was no longer about reputation. It was about survival. Joseph went inside and spoke to Mary that night in a tone she'd rarely heard from him. Tight, urgent. He didn't tell her everything. He didn't want fear to poison her sleep. But he told her enough. We stay watchful. Mary looked at him, and in her eyes, Joseph saw the same calm steel that had carried her through scandal and exile and pain. "We always have," she said. Joseph nodded, feeling both love and sorrow, because he could sense it now, the approaching line where his strength would end. He was not afraid of death as an idea. He was afraid of leaving the fragile behind. So he did what he'd always done at the edge of helplessness. He prepared. He made sure the tools were in order. He made sure the household could run without him. He made sure Jesus understood work, community, prayer, restraint, compassion. He made sure Mary was not alone in practical things. He tightened every loose thread he could find before his hands stopped being able to knot them. And through it all, Nazareth kept breathing its ordinary breath. Markets, arguments, weddings, funerals, never fully grasping that the quiet man in the workshop was holding back a tide with nothing but his will. Because that's what Joseph was, not a spotlight, a dam, not a singer, a shield. And shields don't get celebrated while they're absorbing blows. They only get noticed when they're gone. Joseph didn't die in a dramatic scene. No crowd, no speeches, no trumpet of glory. Just the slow, humiliating truth of the human body. Breath getting shorter, mornings getting heavier, pain moving into places you can't stretch out. The hands that once steadied whole beams begin to shake when you lift a cup. The eyes that used to catch danger in a stranger's posture start to blur at the edges. It wasn't heroic, and that, strangely, was part of the holiness, because Joseph had never been the kind of man who demanded his life be witnessed. He was the kind of man whose love was proven when nobody was watching. The first sign was small, a day where he couldn't finish a job he'd started. He stood over the workbench, tool in hand, and the measurement wouldn't settle in his mind. He blinked hard, angry at himself, and felt a sudden dizziness, like the room shifted sideways. He gripped the bench until the world stopped spinning. Jesus, older now, shoulders broader, gaze deeper, noticed immediately. "Sit," Jesus said, not as a child asking, but as a son who could read his father's limits. Joseph wanted to refuse on instinct. Pride is a stubborn animal. It claws. It bites. But Joseph had always preached restraint. If he couldn't practice it now, then all his quiet teaching would be hypocrisy. So, he sat. And in that simple act, Joseph crossed another threshold. The shift from protector who acts to protector who must trust. That's the hardest kind of surrender. Natan, of course, smelled it. A rival like Natan doesn't need a spyglass. He only needs time. Weakness becomes obvious in a village. It leaks out through posture, through absence, through silence at the market. One evening, when Joseph was walking slowly back from the synagogue, Natan appeared beside him like a shadow that had learned to speak. "You're fading," Natan said conversationally, as if discussing weather. Joseph didn't stop. "Move." Natan matched his pace. "You fought hard, Joseph, I'll give you that. You kept your little story afloat for years." Joseph's throat tightened. "You're still talking." Natan's smile was thin. "Talking is powerful." Joseph glanced at him, eyes sharp despite the tiredness. "It's all you have." For a moment, Natan's expression flickered. Anger, then control. "When you're gone," Natan said softly, "who will protect them from the world?" Joseph's pulse hammered. Not from fear for himself. From the cold picture of Mary alone, from the knowledge that people who love rumors do not stop just because a man dies. Joseph leaned closer, the way he used to lean over a crooked plank to correct it. His voice dropped to a level that didn't need volume. "You think I'm the wall," Joseph said, "but I'm not. I was never the wall. I was only the builder." Natan sneered. "Poetic?" Joseph's eyes didn't blink. "And builders leave foundations behind." Natan's face tightened, like he wanted to spit something cruel and couldn't find the right shape. Then he said the one line he thought would finish Joseph. "Your boy will break them." Joseph stopped walking. Natan watched him with satisfaction, thinking he'd struck the deepest nerve. Joseph turned, slow, careful. like an old door opening without a squeal. "My son will be what God makes him," Joseph said. "And men like you? You'll be what you choose." Natan scoffed, but there was something uneasy in his eyes now. He had always needed Joseph to collapse. Joseph refusing to collapse, even while fading, was a kind of defeat. Joseph walked away, leaving Natan standing in the road like a man suddenly unsure if his enemy had been stronger than him all along. That night, Joseph sat with Mary in the quiet of their home. The lamp flame was small. Outside, dogs barked at nothing. Inside, the air felt dense with unspoken knowledge. Mary's hands, steady, worn by years, rested in her lap. Joseph looked at her and felt something that surprised him. Gratitude so sharp it almost hurt. Not gratitude for comfort. They'd had little of that. Gratitude for companionship in hardship. For being chosen, imperfectly, painfully, to stand beside a woman who carried a mystery and never used it as a weapon. Joseph spoke quietly. "When I'm gone?" Mary didn't flinch. She didn't look away. "We will keep walking," she said. Joseph nodded, eyes stinging. "He's ready." Mary's mouth tightened, emotion controlled, not denied. "I know." The next day, Joseph asked Jesus to meet him in the workshop. The workshop smelled the same as always: wood dust, old oil, heat trapped in grain. For Joseph, it was like stepping into his own memory. He sat on a low stool. Jesus stood across from him. For a moment, neither spoke. Because there are words that feel too small for what you mean. Then Joseph reached for a plank, rough, unfinished, and placed it between them. "You see this?" Joseph asked. "Yes," Jesus answered. Joseph ran his fingertips along the grain. "People look at wood and see a board. I look and see what it can become, and where it can split." Jesus watched him, eyes calm. Joseph's voice thickened. "You will meet people who are like this. Some will look strong but split under pressure. Some will look broken but hold more weight than anyone expects." Jesus nodded slightly. Joseph swallowed, forcing the next words out like pulling a nail from stubborn timber. "Promise me something." Jesus didn't hesitate. "Tell me." Joseph stared at him. "When you carry what you're meant to carry, don't despise the ordinary." Jesus' gaze sharpened, as if the phrase landed deep. "I won't," Joseph continued, words coming faster now, because time was a narrowing tunnel. "Don't let attention make you cruel. Don't let praise make you vain. Don't let hatred make you hate back." Jesus' expression didn't change, but his eyes softened. "I hear you." Joseph's chest ached. Love mixed with fear, mixed with the strange sorrow of knowing your child will step into suffering you cannot prevent. Then Joseph said the truest thing he'd ever said. "I couldn't protect you from everything." Jesus stepped closer. "You protected me from what you could," he said simply. And that simple sentence, so plain, so fair, made Joseph's throat close, because it meant you did not fail, not completely. Joseph's final season came quietly. He stopped taking large jobs. He sat more. He watched. He watched Mary move through the day like a steady river. He watched Jesus' presence in the house, how people responded to him, how neighbors softened around him without knowing why. He watched the world continue to be itself, petty, beautiful, brutal, hungry. And in the midst of it, Joseph's fear changed shape. It no longer screamed, "What if?" It whispered, "Soon." When Joseph finally died, it was not alone. This is how tradition often imagines it. Joseph at home, Mary near, Jesus close. A death attended by love. Not an ending that erases pain. Death always hurts the living, but an ending that refuses abandonment. Joseph's breath became slower, like waves calming. He looked at Mary, his companion in scandal and exile and survival, and felt his chest fill with a last, fierce tenderness. He looked at Jesus, the child he had named, the child he had held, the child he had raised into manhood, and he understood something. that made tears gather without shame. Fatherhood is not possession, it's stewardship. You hold what you love for as long as you can, and then you let it go, trusting it belongs to God more than to you. Joseph's final breath left him, and the room did not explode with light. It simply became quieter, like the world had lost a stabilizing weight. After Joseph's death, the village did what villages do. It adjusted, it absorbed, it relabeled. People who had mocked him softened their voices when they spoke his name. People who had ignored him began to mention his goodness, as if they had always known it. And Natan expected Joseph's death to loosen everything. He expected Mary to become vulnerable, Jesus to become unanchored, the old rumors to rise again like rot from beneath a floorboard. At first he tried. He spoke carefully, like a man testing a wound. He made suggestions like, "It's sad, isn't it? How that family always attracts trouble." He leaned toward old insinuations, hoping the village would remember its appetite for scandal. But something unexpected happened. Without Joseph, people noticed what Joseph had been. They noticed how he had repaired roofs without asking for praise, how he had kept his word even when it cost him, how he had never used power to humiliate, how he had treated Mary with a dignity that made other men look smaller. And that recognition, too late, always too late, became a kind of social shield. Not perfect, not absolute, but enough that Natan's poison didn't spread as easily. He had built his influence on Joseph being the suspicious one. Now Joseph's death turned him into the wronged one. And suddenly Natan's whispers sounded less like insight and more like cruelty. Natan's power weakened. Not because he repented, because his audience shifted. People can tolerate ugliness when it's entertaining. They tolerate it less when it starts to look like bullying a dead man's memory. Natan didn't disappear, but he lost something that mattered: control of the narrative. And then Jesus began to move beyond Nazareth. The boy Joseph raised, the one taught to measure twice, to build straight, to endure misunderstanding, grew into a man whose words would set the world on fire. Joseph did not live to see the full storm, but his fingerprints were on everything. Every time Jesus spoke of God as Father with tenderness rather than terror, Joseph had modeled tenderness without weakness. Every time Jesus honored the poor, the working, the unnoticed, Joseph had shown that labor can be holy. Every time Jesus stood steady under accusation, Joseph had taught endurance. Every time Jesus protected the vulnerable, Joseph's old question echoed, "Will you look away or intervene?" Now comes the leap across centuries. Why would Nigeria, a land far from Nazareth, call Joseph its patron? Because Nigeria knows Joseph's world, not in geography but in pressure. Nigeria is a place of enormous faith and enormous tension. Vibrant Christian communities, deep Catholic devotion, daily life marked by family responsibility, work, struggle, and in many regions, real danger, sometimes from violence, instability, or persecution. In such a landscape, the idea of a protector is not abstract. It is urgent. Joseph is not patron of the comfortable. He is patron of the people who wake up, shoulder weight, and keep going anyway. In Nigerian Catholic life, devotion to Saint Joseph often speaks directly to three ache points many people feel in their bones: fatherhood and family protection. Joseph is the man who stayed when leaving would have been easier. The man who shielded mother and child when political power turned predatory. That resonates powerfully in a society where family is sacred and responsibility is heavy, where being a provider isn't just a role, it's identity, work, and dignity. Joseph sanctifies labor. He isn't a saint of lofty speeches. He is a saint of calloused hands. For people who build livelihoods under hard conditions, craftsmen, traders, farmers, workers, Joseph feels like one of their own. Quiet, competent, faithful, stubbornly honest in a world that rewards shortcuts, faith without spectacle. Joseph's strength is interior. Nigeria's Catholic spirituality is rich with vibrant worship, but there is also deep respect for endurance and spiritual discipline. Joseph embodies a faith that doesn't need to show off. He obeys, protects, endures, and that kind of faith is a weapon against despair. And there is a darker reason, too, one that makes the devotion feel even more real. Joseph's story includes a terrifying theme: violence aimed at children. That theme is not ancient. It is painfully modern in places where families fear for their safety, where instability can make the vulnerable targets. Joseph becomes, in this sense, a spiritual symbol of resistance, the guardian who refuses to hand the fragile over to the devourers of the world. So when Catholics in Nigeria honor Joseph as patron, it's not because he's decorative, it's because he is useful. He is a saint for men trying to be good fathers in a world that pressures them to be harsh. A saint for mothers praying their families stay intact. A saint for workers trying to keep dignity in economies that chew people up. A saint for communities that know what it is to live with both deep faith and real fear. In Nigeria, Joseph is not remembered as silent. He is remembered as steady, and steadiness can be revolutionary. Here is the final twist, the one that makes Joseph's legacy both beautiful and unsettling. Joseph won against Nathan without ever defeating him publicly. No public humiliation, no revenge, no dramatic showdown. Joseph's victory was that he refused to become like his enemy. Nathan wanted Joseph to be driven by pride, rage, reputation, fear, because then Joseph would be controllable, predictable, corruptible. Joseph stayed free, and that freedom is what people honor when they honor him. Because the world is full of Nathans, men and systems that thrive on panic, rumor, corruption, and control. Joseph shows another way, a life that builds instead of consumes, that protects instead of exploits, that endures instead of collapses. So, if you ever wonder why a carpenter from the 1st century matters to millions in Nigeria today, imagine that opening scene again. The rot, the stench, the disgust, the urge to look away. Joseph didn't look away. That is the kind of man a nation can call patron. Not because he was perfect, because when the world grabbed what was fragile, he intervened, quietly, stubbornly, faithfully, until his own breath ran out, and the shield he was became a story that still stands.